This is the first video in a series of 5 videos that will explain how to use Inkscape to create a two-dimensional figure such as this one here for implementation to a journal article or a thesis. And I'm going to discuss how to in the first video, this one here, draw these objects, and there's different methods and how you can snap with them and move them around. And the next video is going to be on how to create these simple patterns like this grid or these falling slashes. And then the third video is going to discuss how you can create these more complicated patterns where, in this case, there's just a grid that's replicated, but it's not symmetrical. And then the fourth video is going to talk about the symbolic labeling of the figure, so these break lines up here and the center line. And then the last video is going to discuss different methods of labeling these objects. So I'm showing here legend, but I'm also discussing in the fifth video how you can point to these objects with text and center everything properly and get your alignment all set up. And it'll also discuss how you can implement this figure into Word. When you first open up Inkscape, there's just going to be a blank page, and it is a letter page size, and you can check that by going to Document Properties, Control-Shift-D, and you can look at the size of the page over here. If you look at it in inches, it's 8.5 by 11 approximately. So what we want to do to start drawing a figure is start with a little diagram that's about 3 by 3 inches and try to scale our shapes so that they fill that space. So to get a 3 by 3 inch background, a template, one could say, we'll go to Document Properties and turn this ruler over to inches, and it is in inches. By default it's in pixels, so you can see it changes, and you can check yourself by hovering over the ruler and letting it display. So the ruler should be in inches, and then we want the grid on. So to turn the grid on, you say Shift 3, which is the pound symbol, and then so we can draw a 3 by 3 inch rectangle box. So to do that, you hit the letter R, and so it's currently not going to snap to the grid, but if you turn snap on over here and then snap to the grid, and then also you have to let the nodes snap, so that allows you to get this crosshair where you can, like, you will only be able to draw to the grids that are visible. So we'll come in here and just start drawing by clicking and holding the left mouse button and dragging over to a 3 by 3 inch area approximately. The grid is going to be in pixels because of our document properties, but that gives us roughly a 3 by 3 inch area to work with. And the fill color is probably going to be different for you because it depends on your last settings. You can check that by clicking the object and say Control-Shift-F to get the fill dialog. And so I have no stroke paint, whatever, some of these will be depressed, and that's what's active. So the stroke paint is the outline, and the stroke style, this is the width of it. So if this were 5, it would be a thick stroke, and then there's different line types and there's different caps. This is more for when you just have a line or an open polygon, and then there's also some corners that you can choose from, but we're not concerned with that now. We just want this background. If you want to lighten the background a little bit, maybe you can use this list of colors down here. It's a grid of colors. It's a swatch, and the swatch is just if you have some theme colors, essentially this is a way to use those theme colors. These are a lot to choose from though, so you could create your own swatches. That's a whole different story. But to choose a fill color, you just simply, as long as your object is selected, you simply click one of these colors in the swatch and it will change the fill. You can say Shift and then click to get the stroke color to change. So I'll show you here. So if I said Shift and then one of these orange colors, it changes. So this is a good background for us. The ruler sometimes doesn't refresh. So now that we have this background, we don't want to interact with it. We just want to draw on top of it so we can lock it. And to do that, you say Object Properties, Control-Shift-O, and then with this window you can just click Lock. And then you can't select it with the mouse, but one thing to get it unlocked, you could either go into the code, or you can go up here to Object Unlock All in the dialog there. To look at in the code, you have to know, you might want to rename this rectangle. Now it's going to be easy to find where it is, because there aren't many vectors in this file, but our rectangle here will have this this attribute marked as true, and that means it's locked. So if you don't want it to be locked anymore, and you have a few locked figures or objects or something, you can just remove this attribute and it will unlock it, and we can select it now with the mouse. And there is also a way to select the figure if it is locked by using the keyboard. So as long as you have the preferences here, as long as you have selecting where you can where you're not ignoring locked objects. So this is by default, these are both checked, but if you uncheck it, you can use the tab key to select the next object, or Shift tab to select the previous object in the list. So if there's multiple objects, it'll go based on the order in this XML code, which we can get into later. But so now the object's locked, we can say tab, and there it's selected. So what we're going to do now is actually draw our figure, and to start, we'll just draw a rectangle over here. We'll keep it to the left. We know it's going to, well, there's going to be text, so we'll move this, make a rectangle right there, and we'll make it no fill for now, and black stroke paint is fine. Okay, so now this is going to be active. We'll keep everything active. Now we want to draw this L-shaped thing, so we can draw. There's a few ways to do this. You can either use the Bezier curve, which is B, and I would choose this, create a sequence of parallel or paraxial lines, so that you don't have to worry about angles or anything. It'll draw everything along these coordinates. So we'll just draw like this. And then I'm left clicking here, and it automatically closes itself when you complete a loop. If you wanted to have an open loop, you would right click to complete the object. That's one way to complete it. So now that we have this, we need another one. Inset, there's another method. There's a few different ways to do this actually, but if you draw two rectangles, you can also achieve the same thing. Okay, this is really thick. Okay, so now we have two rectangles, and you can actually merge these. And to select multiple objects, you hold the Shift key after selecting one. And so now I'm selecting both these objects. I could potentially move them together, but what I want to do is merge them, and that's Control Shift and then equals. And now if I click it without holding Shift, it's one object. So I'm moving it around without it's snapping to the grid, even though grid snap is on. To let it snap to the grid, you have to select this snap bounding box corners. That's one way to do it. And let's see here. So when I select that, the actual, it's easier to tell up here, the actual edge of the object is going to snap to this corner. So the edge of the stroke, even though when you draw a line, the stroke is centered, right? So these nodes are exactly where you click, and then the stroke centers about that. So if you want to let this object, the L-shaped object, snap to the grid where the node is, so there's the node, you can see it with F2, you actually have to change a few settings. And the first thing you have to do is just change the type of a bounding box, and actually I think we can snap with a path, and then if you have cusp nodes on, that's one way to do it. But there's also another method. So you can see this bounding box, this dotted line, is bounding the object at the edge of the stroke. So whatever's drawn, it's just at the edge of it. But you can change that in the preferences window, and to pull that up, Control-Shift-P, and then you have to go to the Tools tab at the very top and change the bounding box type to geometric bounding box. So that means it's based on the nodes. So now if we select this object, the bounding box is actually on the nodes, right? So these are the nodes, and this may be preferable because now instead of requiring the cusp node snap, we just have this corner snap on over here, and it's going to snap. The node will snap to the corner now. So if we're to draw a new line of the same thickness, it's gonna line up, and that's preferable in my opinion. So now we'll just move this over here, and again, you need to. This grid snapping depends on your view, so it could potentially snap there. So it might be better if you just zoom to this level of zoom. And next we're going to draw just this polygon at the top here. So I'll use the Bezier curve, and I'm still paraxial lines. Okay. So I'll show you what to do if you forget to draw a shape. I forgot a little rectangle in there. Okay, so really we want a rectangle that fits right in here, and if we were to, so eventually we're going to fill these with hatches, and it's really simple. There's just a different fill type. So if we have this object and we want to move over this line and have the pattern move with it, we have to just drag the nodes by hitting F2 and then selecting the object. And with snap-on, everything will remain linear. So as long as we're snapping here to the nodes, it should be fine. And then we can draw a rectangle in here. So if you're reshaping any type of object, but with the bounding box, you have to be careful because if there's a pattern or if there's a stroke, they will scale when you resize with the bounding box. So you can see that the distance between these lines and the pattern has changed now, and also the stroke is a different size, a different thickness, and it was 1 originally, and now it's 0.606. So to keep that from happening, instead of just rechanging it every time you scale with the bounding box, you can deselect these two icons. This one is for the stroke, and this one is for the pattern. And now, if I rescale this, it's going to remain how we left it. So another way to look at the stroke thickness is to go down here, and you can right-click, and then you can choose a stroke thickness. Rectangle, and this rectangle. Okay, so there is no fill on these objects, so you can see this one through this guy. And so what we could do is we could either set this to a solid fill type, which is what I'm going to choose, or you could change the pattern. If you want to use a pattern, you could change the pattern so that it had a solid between the stripes. Or you could even change this shape to something that is missing the corner over here, this one box. So I'm just going to fill this with a solid, and we'll choose the gray so we can tell what's going on. And then this guy we can fill with a different type of pattern. I'm just going to choose these pixels. That looks good. And then this guy will be new patterns. These are all different materials. That's why they're different patterns. Okay, maybe. Okay, so with this connected fibers pattern, I'm going to use the larger one because there's a lot of vectors in this pattern, and the more vectors you have, the more rendering Inkscape has to do when you change your zoom. So you want to try to reduce the number of vectors that are visible. So it's pretty snappy right now. It's reasonable, but if I were to have a huge shape filled with all these vectors in this connected fibers pattern, it'd be slow to render. And one way to alleviate that is if you don't have pattern fills, you can change the way the display mode renders. So right now it's normal. If you just change it to outline, everything is simplified greatly. And the only problem is when you're looking at patterns, all the patterns are gone, so that doesn't really help us. So let's change that back. Okay, so now we have nearly everything in terms of our patterns, but we want to make this figure a little more clear to the viewer if they're looking at it for the first time. So we want to signify that this is axisymmetrical. So to do that, we'll need to put a center line right here along this end, and to make the center line visible, because if we were to draw it like it is, which I'll do here, it's going to be hidden by these line types. Rectangle and this rectangle. Okay, so there is no fill on these objects, so you can see this one through this guy. And so what we could do is we could either set this to a solid fill type, which is what I'm going to choose, or you could change the pattern. If you want to use a pattern, you could change the pattern so that it had a solid between the stripes. Or you could even change this shape to something that is missing the corner over here, this one box. So I'm just going to fill this with a solid, and we'll choose the gray so we can tell what's going on. And then this guy we can fill with a different type of pattern. I'm just going to choose these pixels. That looks good. And then this guy will be new patterns. These are all different materials. That's why they're different patterns. Okay, maybe. Okay, so with this connected fibers pattern, I'm going to use the larger one because there's a lot of vectors in this pattern, and the more vectors you have, the more rendering Inkscape has to do when you change your zoom. So you want to try to reduce the number of vectors that are visible. So it's pretty snappy right now. It's reasonable, but if I were to have a huge shape filled with all these vectors in this connected fibers pattern, it'd be slow to render. And one way to alleviate that is if you don't have pattern fills, you can change the way the display mode renders. So right now it's normal. If you just change it to outline, everything is simplified greatly. And the only problem is when you're looking at patterns, all the patterns are gone, so that doesn't really help us. So let's change that back. Okay, so now we have nearly everything in terms of our patterns, but we want to make this figure a little more clear to the viewer if they're looking at it for the first time. So we want to signify that this is axisymmetrical. So to do that, we'll need to put a center line right here along this end, and to make the center line visible, because if we were to draw it like it is, which I'll do here, it's going to be hidden by these line types.